Alright, so we're back in version 10 here, or at least the beta version of it. Let's take a quick look at About Howler. Version 10, Paint Motion VFX, Generation 5, Tender O Forward, Undo 10. Undo is what we're going to further explore here. So we've seen this quick video a little bit earlier on how to take some text. At some point we have this one, and I'll just kind of recreate this quickly. Something large fonts. Let's get something impactful or easy to read. Let's take the Comic Sans this time, and a little bit boldface will be nice, something like this. Alright, so I'm gonna go and put this somewhere in the middle. There you go, and stamp it down. Where's it? Apply text. There you go. Alright, so that's the technique we've been using to create some short bits and in fact animate it. This one here, I'll just say again, it's just 30 frames. So we have 30 frames. Let's go store this animation. We want to do something with it, but we may need to go back to it. So let's go to store the animation to disk. That's a quick save. I don't have an ultra fast hard drive, but even so it's pretty responsive, even if you save it to disk. No need to say where, what file name, what format. It's taking care of it, and it's a quick way to just click here to restore it if you need to do so. So if you mess this up, if you paint over it, if you have anything going that you cannot undo, let's say you have messed up some of these, just click here and that will restore it. There are other things you can do with it though. You can make this animation the current swap image, sort of a parallel animation going with it, and then you can use filters to combine with the swap, frame for frame across the animation. And that's one I'd like to explore, especially the mix buffer here. Let's do two things here. Let's have this first animation where really nothing is happening, and then let's do another one where something will be happening, and in fact I'll be applying a filter here. Let's say we do a filter that's blurring. And we'll do two types. We'll combine two types of blurring. One is simply a Gaussian blur, right? So we say, well, let's not do any Gaussian blur, and then let's do a lot of it, right, across the timeline. So let's go here from the beginning. Let's add a keyframe, go to the last one, and make it the max, and add a keyframe. And we may want to do this a spline or a straight line interpolation, and apply that. Alright, so now I want to do another animation in addition to that, and kind of make it look like the wind is blowing it sideways to the right. Right, so what I'm going to do is another filter, which is going to do either a motion blur or a mystic vision, dark vision. Some of these will be quite useful. Zoom blur as well. Let's try the zoom blur. Just to get the understanding of what we're doing with the zoom blur is we're doing a blur that is starting from a particular location. So if you have a high amount, the factor here pretty high, as you move around you can see which way it's zooming this away, and if you move this a little bit over and then grab this position to go very far, you can make it look like it's blowing it to the right side. Now it's blowing both the white pixels and the light and the dark pixels, and that's where the other, like mystic vision or dark vision, might be better suited for this, because only the dark ones, in the case of the dark vision, only the dark ones are moving. And so that allows you to perhaps make it look like this is a, imagine a sand castle and it's blowing away to the side, but you want to animate how much that blowing is done here. So what you could do is perhaps have initially no blowing, then strong blowing, and then kind of fade softly back down. Let's do that. Let's go from here with no blowing, and again straight line, linear interpolation, add a keyframe. At this point here, let's do kind of a big blast, and then here at this point kind of fade away again, a little bit left. But of course in the meantime we already had the Gaussian blur applied to that, and together this will look like it's basically blasting it away. Imagine there was an explosion here on the left side, or somebody turned the head wire on full blast and it's blowing this thing away, and as the letter says, it's undoing it. Alright, so let's apply this sequence. And now we have an interesting animation. Right? Now we have this animation that does that. All right, so this animation I'm going to store as well. And I should actually have stored the prior one without the wind. I can still do that. I can go back to the timeline, and because I did save this, I can do an undo. Right? So now I am back to the prior. There's one level of undo, one level of image sequence is being kept on disk, and so it can actually restore that. Even if you had left the timeline editor, it will find that sequence again. So I can store this one as well. Animation, store to disk. So I have now 3 animations, and what I'd like to do really is combine this one that does both the blur on the motion, on the Gaussian blur, and the mystic vision or the dark vision blur, the resulting combination. Not just this one. This one was just the Gaussian blur, and I want to combine it with this one, which doesn't do anything. Now I could also do some animation on this one, perhaps a little rotation. Let's bring this one back in and do just a little rotation so that it ends up in this position, or maybe it starts in this position, and I don't know, something else is going to happen there. Maybe we'll fade it. There you go. We could do a fade in the brightness. Right? So let's go do a value filter, and basically it will start here at full intensity, but then here will fade away. And we'll basically have the brightness go down, or that's the value, so let's go to brightness, something like that. Okay, so let's go, there you go, let's go apply that. So we see here now a filter which is really, really simple. It's simply fading back, right? Fading away. All right, so store this one too. Now what I want to do is combine the two. Right, so we have several animations. This one's the ones that currently loaded. That's this one here. And what I'd like to do is combine it with this one. Right? And so what I'll do is I make this one the swap image. So it's now in a parallel animation track. We have the main track here, that's the main animation, but we have also a swap image, and it's a single image, it's not an animation, but it can grab it during rendering time, it can, or when we scrub through this here, it can grab it from this selected stored animation. So frame for frame, if we are at the first frame, it will grab the first frame from here as well and put that into the swap image. And then if you go to the next frame, it will grab this one here from the main image track, but it will also grab the first one on here. Now you won't see this updating in this stored copy here, but it is grabbing that second frame. And then the third one, as you go to the third one here, it's grabbing it there too. Now there's a way to see that actually. You can click this little icon here, this upper right bigger icon enables layer mixing. And that shows you the combination of the current main image that you see here and the secondary image that's on the swap channel. So you see that mixed together in sort of a layer combination mode. Which mode is it? Is it additive? Is it screen mode? Is it multiply? That's something you can control. Right here, you can right click on that same icon, and then you can say what layer blending mode or mixing mode you want. So you could do like a trace paper, you could do a variety of different styles, and some of them will barely reveal the presence of the other animation. But you could do a screen mode, and you could do, I think the default is, of course, multiply mode. The same here, that's the same as the multiply mode. So as the main animation gets darker here, the result gets darker. And maybe that's not what you want. So let's try a few others. Let's try divide. Ooh, that's an interesting glow effect we're getting here. Look at that. First of all, the divide gives you an outline showing almost sort of the difference between the two. It's not really the difference, but something like that. And here it almost looks like a little bit of a fire trail or smoke trail, blast in the wind, and then it glows. That's a really interesting effect. I like that. So how would we combine those two together? There's a couple of ways to do that. One is from the filter menu here, where there is a whole collection of combines. And then there's another one in the timeline where you can do the combines, but even change the amount of combination across the timeline. Right? For instance, here, if you look at multiply, you can, well, actually, you can't change. There's no parameters to change for some of these. Some of these do, and we'll explore those, like this one here, the mix buffer. You can say, show me one or the other, right? So you kind of favor or put a weight factor on the main channel or the swap channel. But there is also another way, and that's what we're doing up here. Since we are combining the two here in the upper right corner, right click on that and you can say merge with swap, right? So that's essentially then going to combine the two together. And let's do that just for this first attempt. Yes, we want to do that on all frames. And so now we have a resulting animation that looks like this, right? Now, sometimes that's great, but sometimes it's not good enough. Sometimes it's too much of the swap image presence. Maybe we wanted just a little bit of that merging. You know, give me most, keep most of this one that we had here, but and a little bit of the other one that's over here. So that is a different step to do there. It's sort of a combining, but with a blend factor or a weight factor for one and a weight factor for the other. So that's something you can do by putting in an alpha channel in there that says how much to actually blend, how much that operation is affected by the alpha channel. Another technique that I find very useful is to say something like blend, show both, not in a blended way, but just like in a cumulative way, and say how much really. So I'm gonna go back. Let me store this animation just in case I want to get back to it. Store this one to disk, and then I'm gonna go. This one is still the swap image, right? And I'm gonna go back to this one for the main image sequence. So the main animation is back to this one, and the swap animation is this one again. And what I'm gonna do is show both to some extent. And to what extent is what I'll be controlling here. So what I'll do here is first show that with the filter under mix buffers. And with that, you get to choose how you mix them, right? Do you show only the swap image, the main image, which is what I'm looking at right now here on this frame, main image, or do I show the swap image? Right, so on the swap image, I have at the same frame position, what's that? 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. There it is, frame number 9. At frame number 9 on this stored animation, this is the image I should be looking at. But if I go back to this one, this is the image I have. So here you can fade it so that it's not doing too much of the swap, just a little bit of it, right? And then you click on Annie so that it's applying that blend on each frame for frame across the animation. So that's one way to do that, and it's very quick if you don't need to change how much blending, right? I had about 70% or so, or maybe 40 or 50, and it's always the same amount of blending. But if you want to actually combine them in a varying amount, let me show you what that would do. You know, you have this, but here towards the end, you don't want to show too much of that darkness. So you want to reduce the amount of the main channel and increase the amount of the swap channel, right? So what I'll do is I'll go to the timeline, and in the timeline, you can find very similar filters for combined with swap. And there's this one here, the mix buffer. That one does have a parameter, and that parameter allows you to say how much you see one or the other, right? So if you're here, initially this is bright and this is good, and as we go down here, it gets too dark. So what we want to do is change it to go into the swap much more than into the main channel. So let's go around here and say at this point we want to do 100% swap. Keyframe that. Let's go back here. Say here at that point it was okay to start with just the main, because even the swap is actually identical, right? So we can go with that. And so we'll have a transition that way. Okay, at the very end, it's no longer blending anything from the main image. All this darkness is not showing in the combination. But before we get to that point, we sort of have a transition. That's exactly what we wanted to do here. All right, so I think we're good. We have an animation that is going to be different from just those two originals, and we've seen a couple of ways to combine those things. There are other things you can do with the swap channel, not just combining them in those many different ways, but also doing a compositing or displacing them. And that's also a really wacky thing that you can create some really, really nice effects with that. Even a quick embossing by the swap channel. But displacing it, it's something that you can do to add noise, to add underwater bubbles rising from the ocean floor effects, all sorts of different things there to create ripples that are like caustic wavelets refracted to the bottom of a swimming pool or in your coffee mug as you stir the water with a spoon. So there's lots of different effects with that, and it's just great to be able to kind of see or imagine what's happening if you combine or displace one against the other. So the same thing you have, keep that in mind, with the timeline, you have usually the same or similar effects here. And you can go over to this is the combined group of effects, and then there is also the displaced there, displaced by swap. There are fewer here, but they're still very good and definitely worth exploring. Let's try to pool displace. And you see here the amount, the squirrel factor, the amount of displacement. There you go. We'll do a really fascinating neon effect or whatever you want to call it. So there's a lot of really fancy effects you can gain by combining those two animations. You have this one here currently slated as or marked as the animated swap image. That's the source of the displacement in this case. If you don't displace, but instead you do something like combine, that's what you have here. Let's see, less than, you'll see where one is less than the other. If you're doing more than, you see, or XOR, that often creates some really funky effects too, the XOR mode, exclusive OR. So one thing I really wanted to do is, oh, look at that, we actually get some wave patterns here. That's really interesting. You know what, let's do that. I'm going to go and first store the current animation before I modify it further. There you go. And so we have this animation. Now I can apply this one, and there we go. All right, so let's see what we have with this. The reason I'm doing this really is that I want to further take this into even more funky effects. In fact, this one here, I'm gonna say let's slow it down a little bit. We only have 30 frames, that's too fast. So what I'm gonna do is right click on the animation and go to time stretch, and then simply say let's double it up 2 times, and with frame blending, so that it's gradually showing us that transition. There you go. And maybe that's still too fast, and we can do it one more time. Let's make it 90 frames. So that should go into go right here into 90 frames. If we play that at 30 frames per second, we will get a total of 3 seconds playtime. There we go. So here we have a 3-second long animation. And what I'd like to do is perhaps blur it a little bit. These transitions from bright to dark are very crisp, and I might want them a little bit softer. So I'm going to go a quick simple blur and apply that across the animation. And if that's not soft enough, if it's still too crisp, what I'll simply do is just go even further and use something like light diffusion, or of course a Gaussian blur, box filter, bokeh blur. All of these here can have their say. I'm going to go a couple of units here and animate the box filter there. All right, let's say that's good enough. Let's use that. Oops, sorry there, had a little disturbance with the cats. Let's go back. Let's go back to this. Okay, so what I'd like to do really with this animation is actually turn it into sort of a 3D animation of a mountain scene that is being blown away to the side. Right? So essentially what I need to perhaps make sure is it's all maximized dynamic range, applied to animation, so that what is bright is going to be at the brightest possible. Make sure it's grayscale. Let's do, it probably already was. because I started black and white. So okay, so just to be sure, let's do one more time. Expand dynamic range. I think I'm good. All right. So now at this time, we have this really interesting animation here. And what I'll do is I'll put that into the ray tracer, puppy ray. Now, I'd like to go through this a little bit faster, so I'm going to make it a little bit smaller. I'm going to crop some of it too. Let's first do a little crop tool and say, really, I'm mostly interested in about this part here. All right, so right click, crop to that. So that's a little bit smaller. And then I'm going to, in fact, make it even smaller with the resample and say, let's bring it down to 640 by 409. You know what? Who's counting? Let's make it 400. There. And we want to be cheap and go a little bit faster with bilinear only. All right. So at this point, we have this animation that I like to do some rendering in puppy ray. All right, so let's go. Of course, we might need to do a few times, so test that a few times. So I'm going to go store this one again, and the others I don't need anymore. Shame on me for just deleting those. I might wish I had them still, but let's go without. And what I'll do is render that in puppy ray. So let's go position ourselves here with the click and drag for positioning it here. And now I'm going to go to transform puppy ray. Right. Well, first of all, let's do a 3D designer to get a look at how it looks in there. So here is your 3D designer look of undo. And you can get a very perspective or not so perspective look. You can have it flat or really strongly extruded. You can have it from different angles. So there's all sorts of funky effects you can have with that. Plus you can have the background dark so you only see the letters. That's easily done with the fog, the ground fog. Right? If you have ground fog here and you bring the ground fog forward, or you can reverse it, there's so many different ways to get a negative or a different impression of that. And basically get it to the point where the only thing you actually see here are the letters. And perhaps you do want it pre-filtered, perhaps you don't. There's all sorts of different styles you can get with that. And then so before you know it, you've got a nice little 3D logo here. And you want to move in a little bit. There you go. Maybe make it even a little bit taller, a little bit wider. Okay. All right. So that's what you could do easily with the 3D designer. And there's much more in terms of that capability. In terms of the rendering also, you can have the light source come in from one side, maybe make it a little bit more reddish. Perhaps the other light source a bit bluish, and have it actually come from a different direction, perhaps a little bit higher, more intense, perhaps even some specular highlight there. So lots of different effects for the lighting, even ray traced shadows. So you can have the light source come down low and cast shadows onto the inner walls of the unit here, of the text. So there you go. Plus, we also have some ambient occlusion, multiply level. So you really have a lot of different ways to make this thing appear. And it all started from this elevation map. All right, so what I'd like to do is actually take this into the other renderer. We have the 3D designer we just looked at. Now I'm going to go to Puppy Ray, and this one's the ray tracer. And I'm going to go in a hurry, so I'm going to go with the GPU incarnation of that. In version 10, we no longer have to flip the letters upside down. In version 9, 9.6, 9.5, you had to. But here we should be able to read these letters. It's a little bit high. Let's go enable the global illumination first so we can see this a little bit better there. Let's go into a different sky, maybe a reddish. It's actually not very visible as such right now because I need to do an update. That's why. We don't do an update for you all the time. because sometimes you have a setting that just takes a lot of time, so you don't want to be slowed down by those updates necessarily. But what we do want to do is to perhaps change the camera to look more down, and then move the camera to be over it. There you go. And maybe up with the right button. And there you go. So here's your undo. I'm going to go up far away until it almost disappears in the fog. And then actually use my camera angle there, the focal, to the wide angle to make it a little bit more narrow angle. And then also look at this a little bit more like that. All right. So now the trick really, what I'd like to do is to make it look like this thing is blowing away in the wind. And we know that this animation is kind of, has this blowing effect from the left to right with the Mystic Vision filter, the blur that we did, or the zoom blur, or the dark vision blur, should give a little bit of a sense that it's moving to the side as we're going across. Now, in order to really get that effect, we will need to go through it and keep rendering the changing frames. Right now, we're not. These frames that we see here, we're not actually using them. For that, we will need to enable more options and click that more option there. And then there is an option here, animate each frame. I'm going to do that at the very end though, because if I'm doing that while I'm doing this, it's possibly rendering and changing on the fly, and I may not want that. So because then your final render will be affected by what has been rendered on the fly. At least I think it used to do that in the past, and I sort of remember to stay away from this until I'm ready for the final render. So what I'll do is I'll say, okay, at this point here, maybe I'll be still a little bit farther away, and I'm going to move the light as well. The light source can go a little bit lower, could be a little bit closer. There's a shadow. I want a lot of shadow on that. Okay, a little bit brighter perhaps, and also a different color. Now we have the fog color, which is why it's getting this bluish tint here. So I'm going to go the light to be somewhat reddish, yellow, orangey, something like that. And then the fog to be a little bit farther away, so we don't see that fog mist building up too much. And yeah, I think that'll be fine. So now I'm ready to show perhaps one more thing, which is the pre-filter. If I don't do any pre-filtering, the edges will be crisp, and that's great in some cases. In fact, I can also stop the interpolation, and you get that usual, that familiar blocky appearance. It's not visible here until you zoom in, and I will do an animation where I'm actually coming in closer. So the first thing I want to do is go right here, click this one, so you have the keyframe set, and then I'm going to go about 25 or 30% into this animation, and I'm going to go closer. So move this one here with the right button, going closer. I can probably get out of high quality into medium quality while I'm preparing this. I'm not quite done with this yet. So I'm going to go in and kind of position myself into this. And perhaps I want to change the angle as well, so make it a little bit more of a wide angle as I'm coming closer. There you go, keyframe that. Then I'm going to keep doing that, a little bit more wide angle, and also turn around to look this way. Remember, the wind is blowing it this way in the animation of my elevation map here. It's going to be interesting to see more of the tail end, if you will. So I'm going to go and position it this way, and this, and even more wide angle there. Okay, perhaps something a little bit closer. I want to get in a little bit closer like this. Now the light source is too intense at this point. So what I'll do, I'll go about this far. Something like this. There you go. And then I'll also move the light. So grab the light and move that around here. It's too close. It's too intense. There, something like that. And keyframe that. All right, so we have that. Now there's one more animation before the very final one. So I'm going to keep going lower. And remember, this thing is going to undergo some changes as we animate through this elevation map. It's going to blur, it's going to get softer and less intense in elevation. Although initially it's going to rise up because this is definitely brighter than this part here. So it should probably be rising up a little bit. And then here we will go something like that. Perhaps rotate a little bit. And the fog could come closer too now, so we can bring it a little bit closer so we don't see that replication. Because remember what Puppy Ray does is it keeps repeating and tiling the pattern endlessly until it disappears in the fog. One thing you could also do is actually change the color of that fog. Right? How about we make it black? So change the color of the fog and it turns into a blackish. There you go. Or let's make it white. Or some gray. Okay. No, not so good. Let's do white. Let's see what that looks like. Again, need to refresh. All right, that's too bright. It would probably be, it would probably be better if it had a reddish tone, since the skylight that we have is a reddish one. Here's a blue one, has a bit of a bluish tone. We could do that. Let's keep the fog kind of bluish and something like this. Okay. And then that way we have a nice correlation between the bluish color of the sky and the bluish color of the fog, which will then explain why we have bluish color on this environment lighting here, global illumination. All right, so let's adjust that a little bit too, and the brightness of the light source a little bit dimmer, and that's a good one. Keyframe that. And then we go to the last one, and for this we will kind of move really close to the scene. So we'll go down deep, and that's where we should see that blockiness. See how we see every one of those pixels. So every one of those pixels in our elevation map is turning into a little square. So that's really one of the funky things. I love this in Puppy Ray. So we'll kind of go to that for the final view. Let's say around here. But we want a bit more on the horizon as well. So I'm going to go more wide angle. Ooh, that's nice. I like this part here. Let's go a bit more wide angle though. There. Okay. And there we go. So we have the pre-filter is down to 0. The interpolation is off. We could actually change the amount of pre-filtering also. We could change it over time and say initially we have a lots of it. It's very soft, like this, keyframe that. And then when we animate it, we'll have an option to actually keep that pre-filter level as well through the animation. That takes extra time. It needs to rearrange the elevation map, the mesh in 3D. But okay, before we forget it, the most important thing we need to also still do is to go and enable this option here, animate each frame. Right. So with that, it will now actually use this elevation map not just from the first frame, but it will take the entire sequence across the animation and load each frame one by one, rendered based on that elevation map, and keep going therefore with an animated elevation map. All right, so let's go and render that. We can set the quality here if we want to already see it, or we could go animate right here and say what the rendering should be, current settings, or do something a little bit faster. I'm going to do the quick quality here. I mean the high quality, which is going to be faster, just so we get a quick idea of what it looks like at the end. But one thing, let's not forget to also change the global, the pre-filter level, right? Since we do have that one changed, at one point we have a high level of pre-filter, and then at one point later we have it down to 0. We want that to also be animated. And the reason why that's an option here is that every time we do that, it needs to rearrange the mesh in 3D based on that pre-filter calculation. So that's a little bit of extra time. But in the grand scheme of things, it's probably not a whole lot of time compared to the actual ray traced rendering. The ray casting is the one that takes a lot of time. If we have changes in the global illumination samples or in the minimum steps, those are the parameters that you see around here for the render quality. That can change as well over time, right? So sometimes you have some really excellent, fascinating effects you can get by doing that. All right, let's go and render this puppy, pun intended. All right, so the first frame might not be useful because it renders on top of whatever already was in that frame, and I had done a quick render there. So, but here we have animation that's now starting to look interesting, and it's undergoing all these changes on the elevation map, which in turn then also produces a varying degree of interesting looking height map. And here, I don't know what's happening. We don't have that elevation anymore at the very end, maybe the last final frames. Okay, let's go close it and see what happens there. Ooh, that's interesting. It totally came flat at the end, or maybe we're short by 1 or 2 frames, and we still have something in the swap channel, but nothing else going on the main channel. And that can happen, right? I mean, it's possible that it's really back down to flat at the very end, so there's no elevation to be produced from it. The coloration though is still there, and by the way, that's why we see that black coloration. That's why we had that. That's why we also have the black here. These are the colors from that same lettering, right? And if we go by one image here, there you go. You can see the letter U, the letter N, the letter D. It's all there. All right. So why did we have that? Well, because we still had the swap animation coming from the swap channel. We probably should disable it if we want to. We can do that right here. We can go use as animated swap or not. Oh, it's not, because it was in the other one and I deleted that. I wonder if that's a bug. Could be. But what we want to do is fix this one, delete this frame, and now we have this little quirky animation that was based on all of that magic. Alright, so hopefully that will be confusing, right? If not, I don't know what is not or what is. Undo is the word of the day, and lots of different ways to present it. I'll leave you with that and give you some chance to digest and experiment with your ideas and your level of curiosity. Thanks for watching. Thanks for waffling and howling.